I'm John and she's Kate, and this is +8 on Block. Please leave a like as it helps out what we're doing tremendously, and we very much appreciate it. Here's why we feel that Season 2 DLC characters for Street Fighter 6 may be primarily from Street Fighter 4. This is a theory we posted several years ago on EventHubs, that because many of the newcomers that Street Fighter 6 was starting out with, that would be 7 on the base roster, and that was close to double the number of the prior games, that future DLC seasons of Street Fighter would feature a lot of familiar faces, as the newcomers have mostly been accounted for right now. And this happened when the first DLC content pack for Street Fighter 6 was released, and it featured mostly prior games characters, with Rashid, Ed, and Aki via FANG coming from Street Fighter 5. And there was also Akuma as well, who's coming out. Street Fighter 4 is the next game in the series, and Season 2 of Street Fighter 6 could feature 3 or 4 or potentially even more characters who launched in that game since it's next chronologically. To play it out the rest of the way, if this theory holds up, Season 3 would be Third Strike, Street Fighter 3, Season 4 would be Street Fighter 2, and Season 5 would be Alpha, and then it's also possible they even go back to Street Fighter 1, but that's something, it's something that doesn't seem as likely because they haven't hit that game as much with DLC, but if this game is popular enough, I could definitely see them going that route. But this is a long-running theory. We know that Capcom checks out our website, checks out our opinions on stuff, and since Street Fighter 4 is the most likely candidate for DLC seasons next coming up, we made a list of the 10 characters along with our favorite picks on who we think have the best chances of being included as Season 2 DLC for Street Fighter 6. The fact that the current game added more newcomers than any of the prior 2 games means that they don't need to worry about adding as many fresh faces this time around, and they can draw upon the popularity of the prior games of the franchise by making each one of their DLC packs themed on those games. That makes sense from a popularity and a sales perspective, as they can draw upon the most popular fighters from each entry in the franchise to generate more revenue. With Street Fighter 4 being one of the most successful and high sales entry games in the franchise, plus coming next in the series, our theory is that Season 2 of the current game will feature characters who made their debut in this title. And these characters, if they did not debut in Street Fighter 4, if they premiered in another Street Fighter game, we didn't include them on our list. So we're gonna get started here. Kate with C. Viper, what do you think about Viper?
She had a crazy backstory. She was a double agent. She mixed in juggling motherhood with that. Very high execution character. You had to really know what you were doing with her, and a lot of cancelable moves.
Yeah, I remember her, as you mentioned, the high execution, like she got very high damage as well. We actually saw a couple people play her on pad, which back in the day was a faux pas. Like, yeah, if you were playing on pad, you were considered not as good, right? But we saw someone like Wolfcrone really unlock the damage and stuff with her, right. But by doing that, and it's a good way to approach character balance, if you ask me, that high execution characters have the ability to have very high damage as well.
The funny thing about C. Viper was, in addition to her having all that crazy damage and execution, it was through the cancelable availability of her specials. So she had the flame kicks, she had seismos, and the electric knuckle, and her super jump.
Yes, yeah, and what's interesting here is I wonder if she's implemented into Street Fighter 6, if they're going to do stuff like her drive rush, being able to cancel into that to go into like her flame kicks and stuff, and then the trajectory that will give her, and if she has to spend basically a lot of resources to get some of those really wild mix-ups that she got in the prior game, because as you mentioned, she could super jump cancel, but maybe they lock that behind a drive rush thing now. She's very flashy, she's very esportsy. She's it's one of the reasons how come she's one of my picks to be included in here. I think she's going to be fairly high at the top of the list. If they go this route with the characters. And it's one of the things that you've talked about here is that she's got quite a bit of interesting stuff with her plot, being a double agent, being a mom, and then she apparently kidnapped Ken's wife while she was pregnant, Eliza, and stuff like that, like crazy stuff like that, right. Which is pretty wild for this character. So she's kind of a good guy, kind of not, based on like Angelina Jolie, right? She's a really interesting character that I think has got a good chance of appearing in this next game.
Speaking about appearing in the next game, Poison here. She would be an interesting ad. I'm happy that they are picking a character from the Final Fight and Mad Gear sort of gang group. There's a lot of strong emphasis of that in the World Tour mode when it comes to the whole Metro World and Mayor Hagar, everything else. You know, Hugo and Abigail all through the background. It would be really nice to see her come back and hang out with everybody.
Yeah, and it would also add another long to mid-range owner in the game, which we don't currently have a lot of right now. So I think she would be a really good pick in that regard. That's why she's one of my other 4, along with Viper. Yeah, I think she'd be a really fun character to see in there.
Right. I think her playstyle would sort of be based a little bit on Ed's, except with his Psycho Flicker. I think the whip would probably go a half range further than that.
Yeah. It would be interesting if they put hurt boxes on the whip too, because with some characters, they will put like hurt boxes inexplicably on their weapons, and will blow them up, like, so you can do some really crazy whip punish stuff. And then sometimes Capcom's like, oh, we didn't put any hurt boxes on this one. Good luck with that.
That's right. You know, in Street Fighter V, they put a hurt box at the end of Vega's Claw. We noticed that.
Yeah.
We remember. So, you know, let's hope. We'll have to see what'll happen with Poison.
Yeah. And going back to the whip punish stuff, especially with the heavy resources in Street Fighter 6, where you can dish out amazing amounts of damage with a single attack. Like if you whip punish like Poison from full screen and then throw a level 3 on there, you might wipe out 60 or 70% of her health, like from full screen. So how good at zoning is she going to be? You know, that's a really good question here, and it's going to be quite interesting if she's added to this game.
Yes. Absolutely. You know, so we're going to have to see what's going to happen with Poison. Another very strong character in Street Fighter V and Street Fighter 4, really. Lots of DLC costumes for her. Everybody loved her different outfits. Let's take a look at Gouken.
He's Ryuzen Kin's master that Akuma killed to sleep.
That's
One
right.
of the few people. He's raging demon, and you know, yeah.
That's right. Pretty craziness. You know, poor Gouken. He was based off of Shenlong, which is in Street Fighter 2, when they interpreted what Ryu was saying. He said, you must beat Shenlong to stand a chance. It was supposed to be, you have to beat my Shoryuken to stand a chance, but Shenlong is supposed to be Gouken.
Yeah, it was EGM that infamously ran that April Fool's joke, that where you had to like perfect the game and do all this other kind of stuff, and people were wasting lots of money and lots of quarters trying to unlock Shenlong or Gouken. And then finally, when Gouken was actually introduced, he somewhat resembled Shenlong. And then they also give you know, Kin some of the like the fire uppercuts and stuff like that from back in the day. So pretty darn cool. Yeah, it's a cool homage. Yeah, it's interesting because Gouken's got a lot of the upward fireballs and stuff, and you don't usually look at like Ryu and Kin backing off in this day and age and like, you know, zoning from full screen, but that is something that Gouken does very well. And he's also got like the demon flip, and then he's what Ryu has tapped into now, the power of nothingness, which is basically the antithesis of the Setsui no Hado, you know, kind of thing. That's what Gouken is now known for, or was known for. He kind of died, he kind of didn't. Raging demoned him to sleep and stuff. It was interesting when they were introducing this character back in Street Fighter 4. The developers in Japan, they said that they basically brought him back from the dead, and they didn't make it a reason for him to be alive again. But when they went to translate it for the American audiences, they're like, oh, we actually have to give him a reason to be resurrected.
You know, possibly when he got Raging Demons, he was going into more of his meditation and power of nothingness, you know, in that bit of a mix-up there.
Yeah, I think that's the correct answer. Yeah, I forgot about that. That's exactly what he did. So... and shouts to Velociraptor. It's we both have Gouken as one of the characters we'd like to see come back here in Season 2 of Street Fighter 6, and Velociraptor, of course, being one of the top Gouken players, is always very much a joy to watch him up there and watch how he would zone out. And then, of course, if you played someone like Hugo, you hated Gouken because it was almost impossible to duck under his medium fireball. From pretty much any range on screen, it would just pop Hugo right in the head. So that made that matchup almost unwinnable for poor Hugo fans out there, all 5 of them. So,
you know, the funny thing about Gouken also is you have Gouken and Gouki, who is Akuma, and they're brothers, right? And they're both on the same martial arts path together, going together, and then Gouki starts to branch off into the whole Satsui no Hado, but in the most extreme way that you can do it. Because Gouken is basically... he's going into the whole power of nothingness. He's using meditation to go into the power of nothingness. The interesting thing also is one of the brothers, Gouken, ended up adopting Ryu in as a child, which technically means that Gouki Akuma is Ryu's uncle.
Oh, there we go. Keeping it in the family there, right? It's a lot of like rivalries on that one. So
Gouken seals Ryu's Satsui no Hado, so it doesn't boil over after Ryu beats Seth. And when Akuma finds out about this, he's just blown away because he wants Ryu to boil over. So that's when Gouken and Akuma have another major blowout with each other.
Yeah, and throughout the history here of Street Fighter, like Akuma's constantly kind of taunting and tempting Ryu to basically give into the dark side so he can get his battle to the death, right? So he's pretty salty at his brother. Once again, after killing him and having him come back, I'm sure he's pretty pissed off now.
I would absolutely think so.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that as Street Fighter V starts up, and, you know, we're seeing that Ryu is okay because Akuma did not come after Ryu again. It's implied that Gouken won the match.
Yes.
Against Akuma. Right.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
You know, very interesting. Very interesting. Street Fighter V, through Ryu's timeline, they continue the story of Ryu and Gouken together. And then it goes into Street Fighter VI, where through Ryu, once again, he speaks about Gouken in the World Tour mode. Gouken had given Ryu a matching set of his prayer beads, but he doesn't like to wear them too often because he feels that it affects his mobility.
Interesting. And then he's also sporting what looks like Gouken's robe now.
Yes.
And so, once again, showing his mastery of the power of nothingness and how much he's grown in that time. Yeah, I do want to ask you, Kate, one of the things I'm seeing here with Gouken, like how he may be implemented is like using drive gauge like for his fireballs. Like previously it was like doing EX stuff, and he could throw them at multiple angles and stuff. Like I could see him using drive gauge on his fireballs to like charge them up and basically give them like kind of some crazy properties and maybe even give him like another Denjin Hadoken kind of attack as well. Gouken is really the fireball master in terms of, you know, the way he throws them and all that other kind of stuff. So I could really see Capcom beefing him up quite a bit with using drive gauge in 6 in that regard.
So Gouken, you know, he definitely has my vote. I think he would be very strong in the storyline. I would really enjoy seeing him in Street Fighter 6.
Yeah, that's a big yes for me for Gouken as well. So. Sethlo's mostly a rushdown, mix-up heavy character. You never know how Capcom's going to alter him and what moves they're going to give him because he's a character who can steal other characters' attacks. So he can really run the gamut with what moves he's given. There's never really anything too set in stone. You figure there's a few things that he's pretty much going to have that are kind of ported over from 4 and 5, but they can really heavily reinvent this character because of how he, you know, steals other characters' moves and installs them. Pretty much the sky is kind of the limit. So I don't know what direction they would take if they ended up adding Seth into Street Fighter 6.
I would like to see Seth utilized a little like Shang Tsung, so that he could do a lot of the long-range projectile juggles and, like you said, move absorption. I would really like to see Seth almost become a liquid, you know, mercury form like the Terminator in Terminator 2.
That would be quite fascinating. Yeah. All right, so next up we've got Decapre, and she's one of the 13 Shadowloo dolls. I really like this character. She had a pretty rough introduction because Ono basically said when she was being introduced that no one had correctly predicted that she was going to be in Street Fighter 4, and a bunch of people had actually called her. And then like it was kind of downhill from there for a lot of people's perception of the character. I personally liked her. I know a bunch of other people have played her. But one of the things I found very fascinating that you mentioned, Kate, is that she's built a lot off of Vega. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Visuals are built from Vega, so she does have the mask, she wields the claw, and she does have a bit of the stealth options to her. But in the end, you know, when she was initially released into Street Fighter 4, she did better than Vega ever did.
Yes, she did.
Yeah. But she's a lot of fun. We had a lot of very good Decapre players, and just trying to keep an eye on where she was on the screen was very, very difficult. I remember playing against this character and thinking you had to have a lot of just character matchup experience with her to have an idea of what she is able to do, and then you have to have an idea of the person that you're playing against and what their general game plan is going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and she was very high mobility, a lot of quick mix-ups, and then you coupled that with a fully invincible reversal, which was basically like her flash kick, essentially. And what's interesting with this character is there's some overlap with her moves, like Ed's Psycho Ball Super. You know, Decapre has that same one, and she also hits pretty hard, similar to Cammy, which is unusual for a character of her size and stature. So I wonder, to basically make her more balanced, if Capcom would basically make her moves a little bit more risky, because in 4, a lot of her moves are basically safe, or like could be made like done at ranges with it, make it very hard to punish her. And so I wonder if she'll be more fundamentally based around normals and things this time around.
Possibly. I could see they could say, okay, you know, we're going to give her a little bit more of a you know, unsafe, you know, start up there. I do remember in Street Fighter 4, her anti-air was just unbelievably good. Man, we would try to jump all around that anti-air. She would shoot her fist up in the air with her claw, and it would just, bam, the hitbox was huge. But she was a very, very good character, very good rushdown active character there. And, you know, she was in the Street Fighter V storyline where Cammy had basically broken her out from Shadaloo, and then she ended up running into Vega and Jury along the way. I was pretty surprised that Decapre was not put into Street Fighter V.
Yeah, I think that Capcom actually initially intended to put her in the game, because as you mentioned, that she's so featured very heavily in the Street Fighter V story footage, and it's like, oh, here we go, you know, and she's actually one of my picks to be included here in 6. I really love Decapre, but there's a lot of people who did not like this character. She was hated by quite a few people in the community for the reasons that you just outlined, in terms of just how her moves worked, you know, and other things like. So I get why Capcom never added her into 5, but I really hope that they bring her back for 6. I really like the character quite a bit. I'm not a huge fan of the dolls, but Decapre has always kind of stood out to me quite a bit as one of my, you know, she's someone I played a decent bit, and yeah, I like her a lot.
I liked her. Yeah. I did. You know, I thought she was a lot of fun. I thought she had different layers to her also, because the story with that could possibly be, okay, well, now we can go in a deep dive into the doll history and how Cammy and Decapre interacted together when they were experiencing training and everything back in Bison Shadaloo days.
Yeah, training is a way to put it. Also, torture and mind control is another way to. Yeah, Bison would definitely call it training, but yeah, I don't know about anyone else. So, yeah,
that's right. Well, speaking about torture,
yeah, tell me.
Our next character is Oni. I liked Oni a lot.
Yeah, this is one of your picks for DLC characters, right?
Yes.
Like, so why did you like Oni so much?
Well, visually, just looked awesome. I tried playing him a little bit. Basically, he's a large demon ogre Kuru. Supposedly, he may be the next form that Akuma is supposed to take if he becomes one with the Satsui no Hodo. Basically it's one of the alternative paths for Akuma, where if he completely loses his humanity and completely just gets embraced by the Satsui no Hodo, he becomes Oni. Right. Well, I think the other step is, I don't know if we can say this on here, I think the other step is he's supposed to die. Right?
Well, that's one of the things about the Satsui no Hodo, is that it corrupts its users so badly that they lose all their humanity, and you would assume that it basically corrupts to the point of death because of what's happening to Akuma and what's kind of happened to Oni. They've lost so much of what would make them human, that you would eventually feel that would, you know, basically knock them out, kill them at some point in time.
Possibly. Right. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I'm really curious what directions Capcom is going to take Oni in, because we have an Akuma that's further in the timeline now, where he could have became Oni, or you know, maybe he's still on his way to doing that. And if you want to make Oni stand out, you might have to make him quite a bit different than the version of Akuma we're now getting.
Right.
And Akuma and the Shoto moveset are so popular, I don't think you can completely rule out Oni returning as well. But I think it would have to come with some new moves. He's got, you know, like the Demon Slash and, like, you know, the jump up and ground pound things and stuff that Akuma does not look to have, at least in the same ways as Oni does. So those would be 2 unique moves he could have, but I think you have to give him more stuff to make him his own unique character. Shoto characters are just so popular, as we've seen, like with Evil Ryu, you know, Sakura, Sakura and other characters that like it's people might say, oh, you know, we've got Akuma, but so there's no room for Oni. It's like, well, these characters, they sell quite a bit for DLC sales.
Yes.
And Capcom's got so much incentive to put a character like this in here because of that reason. They tend to shoot up the popularity charts. I don't think Oni ever got to that level, not of an Akuma or a Ryu or a Ken, but
right.
he still was noteworthy enough, I think, to be considered here for season 2 of Street Fighter 6.
I think that he definitely had more of a pull than Kaye did in 5.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in my opinion. But one of the favorite things that I really liked about Oni, I played him a little bit in 4, was I liked his DLC costume where it looked like he was cracked pottery. And then he would just sort of fall apart the more that you'd hit him. I thought that was the neatest thing. It was an interactive costume, and back then it was so cutting edge, and I hope that they do something like that again in 6.
Well, that also speaks very heavily to what you were talking about, where the Satsui no Hado might corrupt you to the point where you're dying, you know, kind of thing. And it's like the costume falling apart might be very symbolic of that, you know,
right.
that it's like, oh, you know, like the more you hit him, like the more he's just basically disappearing to nothing at that point. He's just breaking into pieces, right? So that would back that up pretty heavily. Something
neat that's really interesting about Oni also is his more intense fireball, which would be the half circle back fireball, is electrified. And that electricity, we could say, could be coming down through the thunder and lightning god Rajan through Oni, and there is a little bit of a type of sweep of this going through these games also into the Tekken games with the Mishimas.
How does it come up in the Tekken games?
Well, there's a theory that Heihachi could have had some sort of an experience with this god Rajan, and that is how they are able to access the electricity in their fighting style.
Wow.
Different.
So we might even have, because we've already had Akuma in Tekken 7. He was part of the plot tied into there. We've talked about that before in a previous video. But now if Oni comes back, we might even be able to tie that in further to the Mishima clan. That would be quite interesting. Yeah.
From the same source, possibly. So that would be something interesting to see.
Yeah.
Possibly for Tekken Cross Street Fighter there, so we'll have to see,
the game
right?
that's never going to happen, yes.
No,
that never does
don't
happen.
say that. Oh my gosh, I'll be so bummed. Terrible. That's funny. Oni's definitely one of my favorite picks.
Yeah, definitely a good pick. I like him. Dream King played him quite a bit back in the day as well, so I know he'd be happy if Oni got back in there. So, but speaking of maybe not of the greatest of picks here, or maybe, you know, depends on who you ask. We just have a video come up here about Rufus being one of the most hated characters in Street Fighter. And he, to me, is very heavily based on Yan and Yang. And for me, I personally would rather see Yan or Yang on the roster. And while Rufus was very popular in tournaments for Street Fighter 4, and was actively played by people like Justin Wong and Ricky Ortiz and a number of other players, he was one of the least liked characters in the franchise, in terms of, like, because he was just so dominant in tournaments. And you know, and one of the reasons I didn't like Rufus is that was a really bad matchup for Rose. But I know that you're a little bigger on this character than I am, pun intended. Keith, tell me a little bit about Rufus.
Rufus was very interesting because he had a lot of moves that propelled him forward, gave him constant, it seemed like it was always his turn, and he was just very domineering. I remember being a Vega player and thinking, you have to stay in the center of the screen and you have to just slowly shut down his options. A good Rufus player was extremely dangerous. I feel if Rufus made it into Street Fighter 6, he would be blowing up the drive impacts. He had a lot of special moves that, because they're multiple hit, imagine Chun-Li's lightning legs. It would be just like that, but even crazier.
Yeah, yeah, and this is one of the reasons we'll go back to him being very hated is if you didn't have a really good counter for his dive kicks, and Vega didn't have a good counter for anyone jumping at him in that game. He had to hold a lot of stuff. That made him a very frustrating character to deal with, and so you had to play a very specific way against him. And I could actually see Capcom working him a little bit differently here in 6 if he's added to this game, where maybe he's more based around his Messiah kick and some of his spin kicks or spin attacks that you were talking about, instead of just his dive kick. To if characters don't have that great anti-air option, that's going to make him a nightmare to play against, as he was in that game.
It would be interesting too to see how his storyline is going to progress further than I'm so mad at Ken. This guy is an SOB. That was his main complaint in Street Fighter 4. But I want to see what's going to happen. And, maybe he ends up teaming up with Ken and helping Ken along his way a little bit. But that would be an interesting flip of the storyline.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if it was Rufus here behind Sea Viper kidnapping Ken's wife or something like that, because it was so we'll find out that was the case in 6 or something like that. On his motorcycle, meeting up with Cindy, right? I'm meeting up with Cindy, and I'm going to get on my motorcycle. That was funny. Yeah.
I liked his DLC costume was based on Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
The zip up.
Yeah. Yeah, he had some cool stuff. Like I actually kind of enjoyed the character, even though he was based on some stereotypes that some people can consider negative. I mostly thought it was done in humor and done in jest, and so I didn't take it offensively at all. I thought it was generally funny and stuff. But again, a controversial character for some people for sure.
Hakan is a new character to Street Fighter 4, and he was a grappler. You could oil him up quite a bit, and that would enhance his slide and grapple properties.
Along with some of his normals too. Yeah.
Right. And character loyalists, that were the Hakan character loyalists, were so incredibly good with him. And some people still are, that whenever you would run into a high-ranked Hakan, because of how rare they were, oh my gosh, they'd be doing all these things that you really couldn't prepare yourself for because you're not used to that matchup at all.
Yeah, it was PR Balrog versus Infiltration at Evo, and Infiltration busted out Hakan and actually beat PR Balrog. And I don't know too many people who had a high level Hakan experience back then, and it definitely would be attributable to that if you pick someone that someone doesn't know intimately and you're very good with that character, you can very much do damage with them. And yes. Hakan was definitely one of those characters. But one of the things that I noticed with Hakan, back and forth, and he was very low tier in that game, that oiling up was very hard for him to do. But I do wonder with the recovering drive gauge in this game, Hakan generally had to spend meter a lot of times to get oiled up in 4. With drive gauge recovering in this game, if they added him, I wonder if he would be a good bit better just on that alone.
Possibly.
But I might even give him something like, the Donkey Kong rolling barrels, basically to cover him up. Donkey Kong back in the day just rolled the barrels at you and stuff like that. I wonder if Hakan basically take one of those oil barrels and just roll it at you to basically give him time to cover and set up something else.
Yeah,
something
that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool if they did that, because that's his win pose, is he carries his barrel.
Yeah. I think they'd have to rework the character a bit because he was very low tier. He just wasn't popular enough. He did have some moments, and it was really cool to see him when we did. But I think that Street Fighter 6 has enough grapplers in the game right now that I'm not super big on I don't think Hakan's odds are super high, but I don't think he's a bad pick either. I think they'd have to rework the character a decent bit to make him fit well. Moving on now, we've got Abel, and another grappler. And this is a character, once again, mostly seen as a dud, because people didn't often like playing against him. They would often call him brainless, mostly because of his Ultra 2, because once he got in and got a setup on you, you basically had to guess your way out of it. That's not too uncommon for most grapplers. It's pretty much a guess once they get in on you. But Abel had some decent mobility, right. but very low popularity, kind of in the long run, and we don't see a lot of people out there calling for Abel. Definitely some people, but how does Abel strike you, Kate?
Abel in Street Fighter 4 was a different type of character, and he was on the initial roster list. The crazy thing about Abel was he had a command dash, then he had the side roll to each opposite side of your character, like a corpse hop. He knew how to keep the pressure up with his elbow. He could keep the pressure up, you know, with his punches and then his multiple different command grabs. I personally really feel that Abel was a tester character for the possible engine of Street Fighter V moving forward at the time. And we had some very strong Abel character players, 801 Strider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tell me a little bit more, Kate, about why you feel that Abel was a test case, do you think, for 5? Like how he was kind of like fitting that game.
I believe that they were testing the high momentum and mix-up a capability route through him. Because
that's interesting. Yeah. To back that up, we had a lot of grapplers on Street Fighter V's initial roster, and then 2, we saw that the game was just, as you mentioned, very high momentum, very high back and forth gameplay.
Yes, right. And if you look, if you compare Abel to, say, Laura, they're both very similar. And I feel that he was just sort of the core of, okay, this is an option of what we can do. How are people handling this in Street Fighter 4? And then we might take these analytics and use them towards Street Fighter 5 then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it looks actually probably like they did. They just did it without Abel, even though he showed up in a few of the
right.
He showed up in a few of the plot lines and other stuff. Like, we got a few cameos and stuff in there, but kind of never took off. Even though he's apparently like a clone of Seth or another Bison body, or however this works and stuff. Even though Seth, another clone of Bison, basically all the random plot lines that they have in here. But yeah, and
it's interesting because in Abel's Super, his Ultra, his eyes turn black. So we were all thinking, oh, that's got to be a tie to Seth. And of course, if it's a tie to Seth, then Seth's in the background of Ed's laboratory in Street Fighter 6. Could we be seeing a Seth-Abel type of mix come in? I don't really know. But it is neat. We do see another call to Abel and France through Manon.
Yeah, and definitely a similar playstyle with both of those characters as well. So another callback there. So yeah, I don't think Abel's got a super big shot. He's pretty low on both of our lists, but I wouldn't be super shocked to see him come back because he was one of the protagonists of Street Fighter 4. Right. So Capcom sometimes will bring those characters back just kind of virtue on them holding such a prominent role.
Right, exactly. Right.
All right, last up we've got El Fuerte. This is kind of a controversial character in some circles, not very popular. I personally have him as a pretty big flop, as a grappler who did very low damage and had to rely on basically keeping people in a blender to win matchups.
If I could catch El Fuerte before his momentum got started, then I could get the match with Vega. But once he started to get momentum rolling on his side, it was hard to stop him. He was very elusive, and I remember El Chacote and Pepide doing fantastic El Fuerte, and it's very, very difficult once that character gets moving, trying to predict what he's going to do.
Yeah, and the level of mix-ups he had and the speed he had, all that other kind of stuff, like it was low damage, but just how much he would kind of keep you in there and frustrate you. Right. We actually saw a very prominent member of the community back in the day playing against an El Fuerte, and he actually rage quit in real life and just said, "I'm done, I'm out of here," unplugged his controller and walked away. That's the kind of stuff we saw with this character, and I think it's a big reason why he's not on either one of our list here, that like, oh boy, like, yeah, maybe they could bring him back, but I don't think his plot line was particularly great. He's known as a cook, but he's the worst cook ever. If you eat his food, you're gonna get sick, and that's probably his best odds of actually beating you in tournament, by getting you sick on his cooking. That's not the best of things there. So yeah, I wouldn't be, I'd be pretty opposed actually to adding El Fuerte into the game. I think there's just so many better options. I really hope that Capcom doesn't revisit him, but he was introduced in 4, so we did have to cover him. So there it is.
I remember I signed up for Street Fighter 4 at Evo Japan, and that's what knocked me out, was an El Fuerte. And I'm like, oh man, and it was one of those things where it was the quesadilla bomb.
Yeah.
you couldn't stop it. I was like, man, I got to try to focus attack this. You try to focus attack, wouldn't work. Focus attack, backdash, wouldn't do it. I'd try to do a backflip, then he'd be getting you with the chest move and going, ah. It was rough. It was a bummer.
The quesadilla bomb we're talking about was known as one of the most notoriously worst design moves once it was buffed in Ultra Street Fighter 4. They buffed the heck out of that move, and as you mentioned, you basically couldn't do much against it except for just take it to the face and hope that you could do it.
You had to just hope that somewhere along the way you're going to try to, throw him off kilter there, you know, or try to catch him. If you're lucky, catch him in cooldown or something, because man, it was oppressive after a little bit. You know, you're trying to figure it out.
Well, you have it there, folks. If you knock Kate out in tournament with a character, they're not making our list for DLC seasons in the future. We're going to give you the big thumbs down in that case. The same thing goes for me, too. But I want to get in, actually, to some honorable mentions, joking aside. Kate, if you had your choice of any character outside of Street Fighter 4 to make the roster, who would you pick?
It'd just be Vega.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I would have to pick, of course, Rose. So Capcom, please make an exception to our list here and add Vega and Rose to the game. We will forever be thankful. We will never badmouth El Fuerte or anything else again. If you do that, we appreciate it. So that's going to wrap us up for this episode of John and Kate +8 on Block. Please leave a comment below with your thoughts. Please leave a like. We very much appreciate it. And we will be back with you soon.